The Panthers had a 2-goal lead in the third, and it was rare for them to come out with no points, and the Panthers' lack of focus cost them a victory.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, March 12th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X and Blue Sky at MondoMan12. Follow show count on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers and on Blue Sky at LOFLA Panthers. You can follow the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Subscribe, and if you're on the YouTube, make sure to press that like button down below. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on the show for another edition. And once again, we are doing 3 shows this week as I am traveling out of state due to the death of my grandmother. But we will just finished watching last night's game between the Florida Panthers and the Boston Bruins. And although Brad Marchand was on the ice for morning skate, the Panthers took the ice in the fourth and final time against the Bruins in a game that was winnable. But 3 unanswered goals by the Bruins led to a 3-2 regulation win for the Boston Bruins, which the Panthers, they went over 400 minutes without trailing and 177 minutes without giving up a goal in across the 6-game winning streak. It's over, but the Panthers have a new opportunity. And here to recap this 3-2 loss for the Panthers against the Bruins, it's a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Jacob Winans is back here. Jacob, welcome to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me as always. I know it's not the easiest time for you to be recording, and appreciate you just making the time for everybody. I know I'd say this a lot, but you definitely put a lot into this and kind of pour your heart and soul into it. So I want to start everything by just saying thank you for being here with all of us, and thoughts and prayers and everything. Just we're all with you and your family right now. So just wanted to start with that.
Yeah, and even though with everything going on, I realize that I have a duty to the Florida Panthers fan base here when it comes to just bringing news and information to everybody here. So very thankful for everybody once again. But yeah, let's discuss this game for the Florida Panthers against the Bruins, where, I mean, for in the first period, it was a little difficult for the Panthers to really get their legs going, hard to come up the neutral zone. And the third and fourth line were really the tone setters when it came to winning races to the pucks. I mean, thankfully for the Panthers, it started off with a face-off win. 4 minutes in, Dmitry Kulikov gets his 33rd goal as a Florida Panther, 50th in his career, now tying Mike Matheson and Ed Jovanovski, and only 5 away from passing Brandon Montour. And the great thing about the first 2 periods for the Panthers is they went over 9 minutes in both of the first 2 frames without allowing a shot on goal. The Panthers scored on a 5-on-3, thanks to Mackie Semiskevich, and untimely support of the pucks and failed clears for the Panthers was really what led to these the 3 unanswered goals. And it's the 3rd time, Jacob, this season that the Panthers have had a lead going into the 3rd and losing. They're 28-3-0 this season when leading after 2, and all 3 of the losses are on the road. But really, for the Panthers, it came untimely when it comes to whiffing the puck, and we'll get to more of the who is to really blame for the loss in segment number 2. But really, that was my big takeaway for the Panthers. As they said in the postgame show as well, it was a tale of 3 different periods for the Panthers, as they in the second period, penalty trouble at 15 seconds after killing one, they commit another, which had the Panthers a little bit of a tough time to really get their momentum in the second period.
Yeah, I thought overall there were some bright spots, but just another game, and this has been a little bit of a problem lately. They've won a lot of games, but they've definitely not made it easy on themselves as far as the discipline goes. We've seen a little bit of, not necessarily alarming, but just a higher number of undisciplined plays that result in penalties taken, and you just don't want to be shorthanded that often. And a lot of it's there are penalties that you're willing to live with, and there's ones that you're not. And some of the ones you're willing to live with, it's obviously penalties where you're preventing a wide open goal, or if there's penalties when you're standing up for a teammate, or someone takes a rough, or there's an extra 2 in a scrum. Those are the ones that you're not too upset about. But it's the stick infractions, the high sticks, the trips, the hooks, that kind of stuff. You really you're living dangerously when you take a bunch of those. So I think the Panthers have to get back on their discipline a little bit, and I thought that was an issue. And then just some careless turnovers. It wasn't total system breakdowns. It wasn't getting exposed as far as play style or anything like that. It was just some uncharacteristic turnovers where guys just weren't making the smart play. We're trying to do too much. And sometimes you just got to play it a little bit more safe. And when you have a 2-goal lead, that's when you definitely want to play it safe. But I wouldn't say it's super alarming. Those were a really big 2 points if you look at the standings. So from that standpoint, that's a little concerning. But as far as the play style, the playoff readiness, that kind of stuff, I'm not at all concerned about that. It's just those were 2 you'd like to have. As long as they don't make a habit of dropping games where they have leads, and I have no reason to believe they will make a habit of it, you can shake that off and let it go. But it definitely heightens the intensity for the game in Toronto on Thursday.
No doubt. And once again, the bottom 6 was really one that really set the tone. I mean, Anton Lundell was outstanding. With that line getting full multiple times where we saw them getting full line change, where we saw one play where Bennett came on the ice and had a dangle around the D, and then one where they allowed Barkov to have a screen right before a TV timeout for them. But really, we speak about the infractions that the Panthers have: 2 puck over glass penalties for them, and then both of the penalties in the beginning of the second period were because they had a hard time clearing the zone. And when the Panthers are already without Aaron Ekblad, and putting more pressure on Seth Jones with the minutes that he's already going to log, which the penalty that Seth Jones committed, that's the only penalty that I have a problem with, that I didn't believe was actually a penalty. But the other ones, I thought they were very fair, with the Panthers just unable to just get the first pass out of the zone for them. But also going to the power play, I thought the pressure that the Panthers put, especially on the 5-on-3, was great for them. Obviously, frustrating the opposition with Zadorov banging Reinhardt's head onto the ice. But it took them a while after that first one to get established in their own zone, not winning the draw. And then once they got the puck in deep, Boston was winning the race in the first minute of the first power play. But after that, I thought the movement was a lot better than what we saw in the beginning of when after they did get their first power play, which didn't happen until midway through the second period.
Yeah, and I think the power play showed some good promise in puck movement, especially on the 5-on-3. Which the Panthers, for whatever reason, really struggled on the 5-on-3 earlier in the year. But Mackey steps up, and he's been on a tear. That we could have a whole separate conversation on the way Mackey is playing right now. His development and growth this season has been ridiculous. But the power play, it's tough for me to really judge it and assess it, because we know this isn't what the power play is going to be when the playoffs get here. But I do think ultimately, this is sort of an audition for Seth Jones at running the top unit, because I wouldn't be shocked when the playoffs roll around if the power play is humming. Seth Jones doesn't get taken off the top unit. You probably move Aaron Ekblad to PP2, and then which will allow him to manage his minutes and log the big defensive ones, which is what his role has been the last couple of years. So
absolutely, yes.
I'm definitely watching for Seth Jones on that power play, and I think he did a good job in Boston. But yeah, it's just really hard to get a good read on it when you know Matthew Tkachuk's going to be there. It remains to be seen who's going to have that last spot. It could continue to be Mackey. We've seen them turn to Verhaeghe in that spot, and then of course Brad Marchand is on the team now. So could we see him take that spot on the power play? Which I would probably lean that way when he gets to the playoffs, have that experience out there. But the good news is there's tons of options, and I think the puck movement is there. So the shots will go in as long as guys are continuing to shoot. And I've also seen a little bit of a tendency to stop forcing it so much to the Sam Reinhart bumper play, and it's opening up other areas. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, I do believe that game one of the playoffs, we will see only one person drawn in, if assuming that Matthew Tkachuk is healthy, and replace Sam Bennett. Him replacing Sam Bennett on that unit, and then Brad Marchand later on. I do think it would be just break glass in case of emergency if things don't go well for them. So that's what I think it's going to end up being. Which, like you said, it's going to be a lot of options for the Florida Panthers here. So thankfully that part of the special teams is encouraging. We also saw the amount of times that we saw Nico Sturm pressuring the puck well, over 55% on the draws, even though the Panthers overall as a team didn't win that side of the puck for them, but still some encouraging signs for the Panthers on both sides of that. Even though the dive by David Pastrnak ended up as a power play goal for them. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to give our 3 duds of the game and the moment where we knew the game was lost. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. And I've got my eyes on a few underdog this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get it on the college hoops action all tournament long. You can do that once again at FanDuel.com. Welcome back to this Wednesday, March 12th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. The Florida Panthers are coming off a 3-2 regulation loss against the Boston Bruins, where they lost a 2-goal lead and ended up with 0 points for this matchup against the Boston Bruins. So I'm going to go, let's do our 3 duds of the game. And it's crazy to think that we talk about the process of the game, that it really was difficult for me to really pinpoint 1 or 2 things of what went wrong for this matchup, but it really was just little itty bitty parts of the game, which really for the Panthers is where I got my 3 duds. It wasn't necessarily specific shifts, but it was the specific goals that happened for the Panthers. Which number 3. I'm going to go with Mackie Samoskevich, a giveaway to Zadorov while he was hugging the blue line. And not only was it a bad giveaway for him that resulted in the GWG, but once Gustav Forsling was beat in the corner by David Pastrnak, a support from Mackie Samoskevich led to Pavel Zacha wide open in the low slot for the GWG there. Number 2 is Dmitry Kulikov. Battle in the half wall on the near side. A pass to no man's land, and even before the puck broke loose, Boston had more numbers in the corner, and that was where the 50-50 battles were important for the Panthers. And then Mason Lohrei coming in and scoring the goal that tied the game. And the number 1, Nico Mikla, there on the PK, the one that resulted in the David Pastrnak goal, way above where he was supposed to be, right up on the blue line. And then the PK for the Panthers was having to one guy shifting to another part of the ice and then leaving David Pastrnak open after the battle, after the puck battle led to him being wide open around the net. So those are my 3 duds of the game. How about yours, Jacob?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because 2 of your 3 duds are the 2 guys who scored goals, which is really uncommon. But it sort of just goes to show you that that offense isn't really as important as defense this time of year. So mine, I'm going to give an honorable mention here to the captain, Barkov. I didn't think he had a strong game up to his usual standards, and I thought in the face-off circle in particular, he really struggled for most of the game, which is, again, really uncommon for him. But I didn't love his game yesterday. I thought he was a little bit passive, kind of got manhandled in the face-off circle, and seemed to just be a little bit a step behind. Third dud for me is Dmitry Kulikov, for the same reason you mentioned, just a really, really careless turnover, and uncommon for him too. He's a longtime veteran. He's not gonna make too many of those errors, but I didn't like that turnover that leads to a goal. My second dud of the game is Etu. I thought he was a little bit careless also in that third period. Had a couple of turnovers and failed to get the puck out of the zone a few times when it looked like the Panthers had possession and were going to get out of trouble. And he's arguably the Panthers' most responsible defensive forward outside of Barkov. So not something we're used to seeing there either. But my number one dud of the game, and I'm going way off the board here, is the officials. The third period, and I don't like to blame refs for losses. I really, really don't. And I know I'm talking to an official right now, and you're an accomplished ref yourself, but I thought the refs struggled in the third period. The game really turns the second they call that penalty, the tripping penalty that David Pastrnak draws, and then he scores on the power play. It's a textbook dive. And if you're going to call the trip, you have to call the embellishment. It's a play like that is the literal reason why you have the embellishment, where, yeah, he may have been tripped, but he launches himself in the air, both feet up, and quite literally dives like a fish. I didn't love the no call there. And then Sam Reinhart appears to tie the game, but the whistle blows way early when the puck is still loose. And then they go to review, and the situation room says that the ref informed them that he blew the play dead and that the puck went in afterwards. But, we've also seen cases where the whistle does blow, but they go to review and they call a good goal because the whistle was errant, or there was the intent to stop play rule has come into effect. So it's like there's lack of consistency there. And then when the puck is loose, you got to let that play go a couple seconds longer. You can't just give it to the goalie, especially in a moment like that. So I thought the refs struggled there down the stretch. I'd rather it happen in the regular season than the playoffs. And I won't lie and say that we haven't caught a couple of breaks from the refs in that building in big moments. So it is what it is.
Yeah. It's funny because it's not necessarily one of the duds of the game, but it is actually tied into the moment where I knew the game was lost. When the whistle blew early and Reinhart tried jamming it in. This is where you want the refs to be a little bit more patient, and then you could go back. It's better to blow it a little later and then review it to see if Jeremy Swayman actually had the puck secured. But also I could also understand if the ref is standing right on the goal line and doesn't necessarily have the angles and the pads are down on as like a V shape, you can't really necessarily see it. So I can understand why, but at the same time, this is where you have to just be a little bit more patient in that situation to just allow the players to make a play. I know that the Boston Bruins players didn't necessarily like that Reinhart was necessarily taking an extra whack at Jeremy Swayman. I get it. But at the same time, it was literally split seconds as Reinhart was trying to knock that in. And I believe Carson Soucy, who got acquired by the New York Rangers a few days ago, had that same situation happen to him and it counted as a goal. So it's just really about making a call and actually getting it right versus being too antsy when it comes to the whistle for them. So that's the moment where I knew the game was lost. But at the same time, it doesn't take away that the Panthers just lack of attention to detail in their own end and getting too maybe complacent. Sergei Bobrovsky said it best. They lost their composure in the third period. And really, you saw it with it boiling up with Nikita Zadorov taking a few hacks at Sam Bennett towards the end. There's a 4-on-4 for the Panthers. They had the open ice, an opportunity there, but really for the Panthers, it was really about just lack of structure at the end. So your moment where you knew the game was lost.
Yeah, that's the same moment for me. The Reinhart goal not counting. I didn't think they were going to really get another grade A opportunity after that. They ended up getting a couple late in the game, but it's just that one, the Panthers aren't great at the end of the games with the extra man on the ice. They've kind of struggled in those scenarios this year.
I think they only have one goal all season.
Yeah, and that's that's something. If I'm nitpicking, that might be something that's a little bit alarming going into the playoffs, because you never know when you're going to need that. But I think it's the same moment for me. But no, I agree with your point there. It's a situation where you'd like to see them play it a little bit of the NFL style, and we know NFL refs are probably the worst across all the major pro sports in the U.S. And but I think the way the NFL does it, where if there's a questionable play, whether it's a fumble or incompletion, they just let it run and then they'll go review afterwards.
Yeah.
And in a situation like that, I'd like to see them just let the play develop, let it happen. Puck crosses the goal line. All right, now we can go to the monitor and review that and see if it was loose or not. So I would have liked to have seen it play out that way. But I'm sure that one isn't. It's not one that we're gonna harp on for too long. It's a bang play. Referees also have split seconds to make decisions the same way the players do, and it is what it is. We caught a bad break.
Yeah, no doubt, and those are going to happen throughout the season, whether it goes into Panthers' favor or not for them. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss the Panthers heading into Toronto with 17 games left. The Panthers will be facing the Leafs 3 times in the 17. So these games are going to be so much more important coming down the stretch. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And you just realized that your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to the hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the candidates faster. I've been in the spot where you need the right hire yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed's sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up the process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Right now, support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring. Indeed is all you need. Segment 3 here on this Wednesday, March 12th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And before we continue on in this segment, I want to say a public congratulations to Patrick Giles, who got his first NHL goal last night as a member of the San Jose Sharks. We are cheering for former Panthers who are gone on to different places. So big congratulations to him. But Jacob, I know the Panthers are playing the Leafs tonight, but I want to touch on one thing before we preview the actual game. The Panthers visited the Hockey Hall of Fame today, and of course, the keeper of the cup, Phil Pritchard, was there. The Stanley Cup was there as well. And one thing that they did was donating an actual Stanley Cup ring, which was a copy of what Barkov's ring is, to the Hockey Hall of Fame as part of the exhibit. And I'm gonna give you the floor a little bit for this one, where you recently went to the Hockey Hall of Fame and actually saw the Panthers exhibit. You saw the Matthew Tkachuk mouthpiece chewed up right there, the bottle of champagne that they celebrated with. And seeing the pictures from earlier today, how awesome was that to see?
Yeah, no, that was pretty cool. I was recently there in January. I actually got to see the exhibit myself, which was it was pretty special. I think the Hockey Hall of Fame, if you've never been, anyone who hasn't been, I can't recommend it enough. It was such a cool experience being there, and there's there's really, really, really so much to see. There's so much history there, and then when you go see the Stanley Cup, it's just kind of in this back room and in the vault, and it's just it's pretty special to be there and see it. So I loved being there. I would definitely go back. You really can't spend enough time in there at all. There's so much to look at. You could literally spend an entire day and not see everything. So seeing the Panthers there today was really cool. I love that they donated a ring to add to the exhibit. If you get a chance to go there and see the Panthers exhibit, I also can't warn you enough how disgusting the Matthew Tkachuk mouth guard looks in there. It is absolutely horrendous. That one's pretty nasty, but it's an important inclusion to have in there. The mouth guard itself had its own little story in the playoffs. Chris Kreider, and that was the only play you've made all series, and just the classic Matthew Tkachuk chirp. So that was super cool. And seeing the pictures, and the team actually took a picture in the same spot next to the exhibit that me and my girlfriend took pictures at. I actually have it here on my phone if you can see that on the YouTube, but right there in front of the Panthers exhibit, which is pretty awesome. So anyone who hasn't been, highly recommended, especially now that there's a ring in there.
Yeah, so just a little bit of an added touch, a place that has so much history, and then the Panthers, big contributors of that history. But now let's get to the game that the Panthers will be playing against the Toronto Maple Leafs. We said as we previewed this segment how 3 games against Toronto in the next 17 for the Panthers. They're 2 points ahead of the Leafs, but the Leafs have a game in hand. So you think of how important this one is for the Panthers, and just it's adversity for right now. No Matthew Tkachuk, no Aaron Ekblad. Brad Marchand is likely not going to come back on Thursdays. Thankfully, he's on the ice skating for the Panthers. And thankfully, recently, the Toronto Maple Leafs, they blew a 3-goal lead against the Utah Hockey Club and ended up winning in a shootout, which right now that leaves the Panthers at 34 regulation wins to Toronto's 31. So that's a big deal for the Panthers there. If that ends up in a tie in points. And one of them, I got to mention this takedown by Simone Benoit, going in the air and getting Kesselring down on the ice there. That in their most recent game, that was a little bit of a highlight that I saw of, even though I didn't watch that game live. But the Leafs have made a few acquisitions, not the biggest of splashes in the trade deadline, but just enough to complement their group. Scott Laughton is their third-line center. They traded a 2028 first and Nikita Grubinkin there. And then Brandon Carlo, right-handed shot D, to play on their first pair with Morgan Riley for Fraser Minton, who was the captain of Canada at the World Juniors and of the Kamloops Blazers of the WHL. And the thing with those two, Scott Laughton and Brandon Carlo, both of them have term. So we are going to see the Florida Panthers match up against those two for at least one more year with Laughton, 2 more years with Brandon Carlo there. And this is really about the change in identity once again for the Leafs. They've only seen them once, and it was really early on in the season, the day before Thanksgiving. The Panthers dominated that one against Anthony Stolarz. Since Stolarz has missed some time, came back, but they're still, thankfully, with the Panthers winning streak, they were able to still have that jump in the standings for them. But really, the pressure's on for Toronto. I feel like it's not really a lot of pressure for the Panthers, but they're not gonna lay back when it comes to a game like this. But right now, there's so much pressure on Toronto because Mitch Marner's a free agent. Carolina actually asked for Mitch Marner during the trade deadline. That was one of the new reports there when they were trying to trade Mikko Rantanen, and he used this clause to say no, that I'm not going to accept the trade to Carolina. But still, there's a lot hanging in the balance for Toronto. While Florida, they can always bounce back if they find a way to not get any points. But still, they're not going to be complacent.
Yeah, and it's a different Toronto team right now. Laughton and Carlo, well, they're not the biggest household names necessarily. They are definitely the type of players that Craig Berube would really like. Both are gritty, tough, Carlo eats a lot of minutes. Lawton can play in all situations. He's got a lot of speed, and he doesn't shy away from the rough stuff. He's a playoff type player. Those are the kind of guys that Toronto really needs to add going into the postseason if they're going to be successful. It's got to be weird as a Bruins fan to see Brandon Carlo now on the other side with the Maple Leafs. He's a guy that has had some success against the Panthers, even scoring a couple playoff goals. He had the goal heard around the NHL day after, I believe he had a baby born, and he flew home and was there for the birth of his child. Comes back and scores a goal. He's a tough customer. Really tall, rangy defenseman, so he's going to help them a lot. The Leafs' big guns are playing well for the most part. Austin Matthews has had a good run since Four Nations. Mitch Marner seems to have his confidence right now. They're kind of humming offensively a little bit. They've blown a couple leads lately, which is uncharacteristic of them. They're one of the best teams in the NHL at keeping leads after the second period. So you don't want to fall behind against these guys. It's not exactly what this matchup would look like come playoff time if they end up meeting then, but jockeying for position right now, and this year it seems like winning the division is going to be ultra important compared to past years, because it's likely going to be the difference between a first round against the likes of Columbus or Ottawa or Detroit or one of them, or a first round against Tampa. And you don't really want to go into a series against Tampa, who's Stanley Cup seasoned and had a really strong trade deadline, has a roster that can absolutely compete for a Stanley Cup. So I get the logic that to win, you're going to have to beat the best anyway, but you want to try to get to them as late as you possibly can. You don't want to have to run up against them first round. So it's a big game. It's a big game headed down the stretch, and gives one team control of first place for the time being.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the Panthers have a 4-point lead, even though Toronto will once again have a game in hand. You not necessarily go in cruise control, but you have a little bit more leeway for them going down the stretch for them, and knowing that the Panthers are going to be away from home, and to know that they are that for them, they want to avoid being there throughout the playoffs. That's going to be important for them, just to go into places that teams are going to be a little hungry throughout the rest of the season. I mean, yeah, Montreal is not necessarily in the playoff picture right now, but they're going to be a hungry team for coming down the stretch. Some teams will want to play spoiler for them. So, but the Panthers, they know we even see at times, even when they're blown out, that they will continue to be fighting until the very end for them. So that's another thing that we know, that the Panthers are going to be just laser focused no matter what. And the fact that even after this, win or lose, that they are still very well in control of their destiny, which is the great position to be in. You don't want to be in a position where you're controlling destiny as far as top of the division, since they're well on their way to a playoff spot. I actually calculated the magic number to clinch. It's 21 right now to clinch a playoff spot. But still, the Panthers still find themselves well in a good position. Hey, 6-game winning streak helps the Panthers in their 6-game winning streak. 24 power plays, 19 PKs. So the Panthers are shifting as far as being the more disciplined team throughout this stretch. So this is going to be ultra important going into a game like this, that the discipline level stays in their favor.
I agree, especially heading towards the playoffs. There's always a little bit more leeway with the whistles in the playoffs. So you want to get in the habit of not taking a lot of those stick infractions and puck over the glass type of penalties, because when you get to the playoffs, they tend to let some of the other stuff go. So if you can cut out the stick infractions and the stupid ones, you've got a little bit more leeway with the other stuff. So it's about finding that right style. But discipline's going to be huge. And then like you mentioned, the Panthers, this is good for them, because you don't want to be the defending cup champion and have and kind of coast to the playoffs with no adversity and win the division easily, and then go into the playoffs not really battle tested. The fact that the race for the top 3 spots in the division is so tight, it's giving them something really important to play for in the regular season, which is going to sort of refocus them and re-prepare them and get them back into the mindset they had last year heading into the playoffs. And they're going to have no choice but to play a playoff style for the next 16 or 17 games to finish the season. It's going to be required, which is good for them. They're not going to be able to coast. And I would also say, just given the Panthers specific situation, avoiding Tampa is definitely, no one will say that publicly, and no one on the Panthers, I'm sure, is scared of Tampa necessarily, but to give yourself the best chance to win, especially with Aaron Ekblad set to miss the first 2 games of the playoffs.
Yeah.
You don't want to drop a couple of home games or even one home game to start the playoffs because Ekblad's out. He's so huge on the penalty kill. Tampa has a lethal power play. I don't love going into a matchup against Tampa without Ekblad and knowing what they have on their power play. So winning the division is important, and we saw the Panthers prioritize it last year when they could have rested guys to end the season. They could have kind of coasted into the playoffs and preserved health, but they came out and stomped on Toronto and won the division. So it's not. I have no expectation of the Panthers taking their foot off the gas or acting like the division doesn't matter.
Yeah, and one of those decisions was bringing Carter Verhagen game 82 last season. So expect the same thing of the Panthers just continuing to put the pressure on against their opposition. It's just fighting until the end for them. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We will be back with you guys on Friday for a recap of this game between the Florida Panthers and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jacob, tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8, and I'll be back here next week.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Safe travels home.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows in the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Where's your team? Every day.